Denver's municipal elections were held on Tuesday, and while Mayor Hancock cruised to re-election, two incumbent council members were defeated in surprising upsets: Susan Shepard in District 1 and Chris Nevitt in the auditor's race. Meanwhile, 4 of the 6 open seats in the council will go to a runoff election in June. Patty, there wasn't any major surprise in the mayoral race since there wasn't any major competition, but the auditor's upset, and I guess even though some people thought District 1 could go that way, seeing the first incumbent lose since, what, 1987, seemed pretty surprising. What did you think?
Well, I think people who thought about running for mayor and didn't because they thought, no way will we beat an incumbent, might be kicking themselves now because the loss, Chris Nevitt's loss, for example, showed even though he wasn't an incumbent for this specific auditor job, he had the money, he had the background, and he lost big to someone, Tim O'Brien, who's got good experience as an actual financial professional, but does not have a big name, did not have the big developers on their side, didn't even have Dennis Gallagher's endorsement. So, and Susan Shepard, although she had been an incumbent who was under attack by some still, the fact that she lost by as much as she did when a lot of her supporters were the supporters for Hancock indicated maybe if there had been real competition for Hancock, he could have faced problems. Also, for example, Paul Cashman, who won and won handily, won against someone who was much more of a development, well-funded candidate. He was the former publisher of the Washington Park Profile. So I think we're seeing that voters are really interested in upsetting the status quo. They are upset with development around Denver. They want to see a discussion of it, even if they don't necessarily want to see it stopped.
David, what did you think of the results in the Denver city election?
Well, it shows most of all the power of Colorado inside out, because Kevin Flynn,
right.
another one of our past and frequent panelists, made it to the runoff, and he will be one of the 2 against John Kidd for one of the council seats. And obviously we know about the star power he had, and he was mobbed with people seeking autographs. And oh my God, you've been on television. Can I just touch you? Can I look at you? Denver, like the European Union, has a democratic deficit, which is, yeah, there are elections, but unfortunately they don't seem to change much. And even for all Patty said about how there were these upsets, and that's fine, we have what I think is what's called the strong mayor system of government. And so the guy who has almost all the power didn't even have real opposition. And so folks who hope that the election results will lead to a change in growth policies, I think will be disappointed, because really our Denver's elected city council has not much power compared to the mayor.
Ed, what do you think has been the general reaction from the city? I mean, while there's not much to react to with the mayoral race, the auditor's race, Shepherd's district, and just overall the different winners, what has been the reaction?
Well, it's hard to kind of figure out the reaction, and I think this was such a low-profile race in general because Hancock didn't have a competitor. A real competitor, that you almost have to look at who lost and see what it says. And I think a couple groups definitely came out losers of this. One, labor. Chris Nevitt and Susan Shepard were both very closely tied and employed in some ways by labor organizations. It does not help that the labor cause, that they're both gone now. Marijuana candidates lost badly. Chris Chiari, an outspoken advocate, last in his district race. Kayvon Kalatbari, who I had said just a couple weeks ago, this could be the surprise in the at-large. 7% of the vote. That's not getting your name out. That's an outright rejection of what you stand for by the voters. I think if I were in the marijuana industry, I'd be worried about some tighter regulations right now. And then lastly, has been mentioned, known entities lost. It wasn't just Nevitt and Shepard that we're talking about here, but 3 former legislators, Jean Labuda, Ann McGean, and Fran Coleman, all couldn't even make it to the runoffs. The tough part, though, is saying who won. It's really hard to figure out, at least until after the runoffs are over, what everybody stands for. I think there's been kind of a, hey, let's be tighter on development talk here. There's also a big strain of we need more affordable housing going through this. And while Hancock has started on that, maybe the winner out of this, very quietly, could be Hancock's push for localized construction defects reform, which he has sworn to take on in his second term. And now he has a whole bunch of new people who are ready to go after affordable housing.
Penn, do you think the 4 open seats that now have runoffs for June, do they take any lessons from what they saw in May?
I think they do. If you look at where we've been, And I agree with that to an extent. I don't think there are any clear winners. I think it's interesting that the mayor had no real opposition and only garnered 80-some% of the vote. There are some people saying, why didn't he get 95% of the vote? One candidate only had one name, and so that's part of the question. I think there is a strong sentiment of discontent in the city. I think that people will be fooling themselves if they think that if you just look at the mayor's race, everything's hunky-dory and people want to move forward. I think it's telling that of the 6 open seats, 4 are in runoffs. That tells you, and in a number of the cases, there were multiple candidates. So clearly there is some fracturing of thoughts, opinions and concerns about the direction of the city. I think the pro-development bias is perceived by some people is what doomed Susan Shepard, even though she was closely aligned with Labor, as was Chris Nevitt. I think that some thought she was too pro-development, and I think many believed that this administration and too much of city council is pro-development. It's going to be interesting to see how all of these runoffs shake up. In the Nevitt situation, I think what happened with Chris was Tim O'Brien's campaign was remarkably low-key. It was elect a CPA for auditor. And that had, I think, an appeal to certain people, primarily who don't understand that the auditor doesn't really perform a financial auditing function for the city. They hire a CPA firm to do the annual audit, and the Denver City audit, much like the state auditor, which is what Tim used to be, looks more at programmatic operations. So it'll be interesting to see. I don't think construction defects is going to necessarily cruise through in Denver, because as we saw on the state level, there's no tie between changing construction defects and guaranteeing the development of affordable housing.